people who were not able to participate today. So now I would like to introduce today's speakers. First of all, we are very pleased to have Claudia Göbel with us today. Claudia is project manager at the European Citizen Science Association and also a guest researcher at the museum. And Claudia is fascinated by action research and tries to link scientific reflection from a science and technology studies perspective with making things happen in the field. Main topics of her work are diversity of participatory research, the organization of citizen science as international research field, relations to open science, and policy engagement. Also, Claudia is a member of the Coast Action on Open Science, Citizen Science. Moreover, we are very happy to have Mirela Alistar with us today. Mirela is postdoc at Hasso-Plattner Institute in Germany, where she researches technology that would enable people to perform themselves medical diagnosis and even produce their own medicine. In her role as founder and chairwoman of community wet labs, she organizes workshops to inspire enthusiasts of diverse backgrounds, such as engineering, art, or design. Then we would like to introduce to you Alexandra Albert. She's currently finishing up her PhD in citizen social science in Manchester in the United Kingdom. Her interdisciplinary work explores the role of citizen-generated data in social science research and the opportunities that citizen social science affords policy. Her research interests include participatory data initiatives, citizen science, small data, and inclusive development. Last but not least, we have David Ziegler with us today. David is based at the museum as well, and there he works as an editor and researcher for the German citizen science platform bürgerschaffenwissen.de. Maybe you can also post the webpage in the chat, Sarah. So then I would like to hand over to Claudia, who will give you a 5-minute introduction before we continue with the presentations by Mirela, Alexandra, and David. And each presentation is going to take about roughly 10 minutes, so we are going to have about 35 to 40 minutes of presentations, and then the rest of the time we can use to ask questions. Okay, I think that's it for me, and now Claudia, if you take over, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this nice introduction, Chris. I'm changing over to the big presentation, and I wanted to give a very short lead up to the topic of this webinar on what is citizen science, because I believe that what it definitely is a newbie to the open science landscape, at least under this phrase of citizen science. So here we have on the left side this concept of open science by Wikimedia, that I think is also basis of the Fellow Program. And there are different aspects of open science that are discussed here and there: open access, open data, open source. And by the very end of it, we also find citizen science. And this happens or has started to happen some time ago, but not too long ago actually, that we find citizen science is becoming more and more part of, or mentioned as part of, open science in practice, like we see in the Wikimedia concept, and also in policy concepts, such as here on the right side you can see the 3O strategy of the European Commission on open science, and they mention 8 policy ambitions. And you can also find citizen science as one of them, among others, such as research integrity or reward system and altmetrics. And this is kind of an interesting development. And for this reason, we are very happy to work with Wikimedia in the Fellow Program. And when I say we, I mean the Museum of Natural History in Berlin, because over the last years, we have developed some initiatives in the field of citizen science, and we are very happy to share this knowledge and also to link to open science communities to develop it further. You can see we have made even a little brochure. It's not very old yet, but still we have to already renew it. But you can find a link to it in the references. I'll show you later. Some of the initiatives we have at the museum include the German project finder platform Bürger schaffen Wissen, where you can find and research citizen science projects that we have, and David is going to talk about that later on. Another one is the European Citizen Science Association. That is an organization that links those people and projects that do citizen science with each other on a European scale. So we establish contacts and workshops between people to share their skills and also to develop projects together. And with this European Citizen Science Association, ECSA it would be in short, we also have a European project doing it together science that is very much about science communication and citizen science and do-it-yourself science. And there is another initiative that might be interesting, which is a cost action, so another network at the European scale, and this time it links various people who do research on citizen science. So sometimes they apply it in their own research, but sometimes they study it. I mention these because I believe that all of them will point you to a lot of other resources. So yeah, feel free to check them out. To start with, I wanted to give a very basic definition of what citizen science is. And Eitzel and others have published a very nice paper this year where they talk about, I don't know, the 20 definitions that we can already find out there and come up with something in the middle that provides a little bit of common ground. And this would be citizen science can be understood as the inclusion of members of the public in some aspect of scientific research. And then to make this more clear, what can we do? To give some of the very typical examples that would count as citizen science. For example, amateur naturalism. Here we have the Orion Association, a natural history association that deals with insects. So they are entomologists and they do research in their free time. They also have a basis here at the Natural History Museum, and yeah. This association has been in existence since the 19th century, so they have a long history, and also when we say amateur, we actually mean experts. So this is where people do their own research, and this is one of the most well-known traditions of citizen science. Another element that we find is community activism. Usually it's in the field of the environment, but I think also the health sector has a lot of history in there, where people get together to get their own facts and measure what authorities do not measure in order to make their claims and ask authorities to take action where action isn't being taken. And then we come to other types of citizen science, which I think are very related to the current boom for this activity. Here you can see the example of Eyes on Odds. It is a serious game with the purpose to help science. So what people are doing is to look at little videos, and then you can mark where you think that the blood flow is somehow clutched, and that will then get analyzed and help in research and eventually on the research of Alzheimer's. Another one is enabled by mobile phones. So I would call it distributed sensing, although I'm not sure if this is already the good name for it, but we can discuss. So you have a lot of people having smartphones in their pockets, and many projects right now come up to make use of that as an asset. And here you can see Florian Heide with his project Roadkill at the Boku University in Vienna, and he asks people if they find an animal that has been killed on a road to call in and make a photo and send him the photo. And they do research based on that. And here we have a last example that goes more in the field of science communication and science education. It is an event which is called the BioBlitz, where you have 24 hours of people being in nature and classifying every little thing, every living thing, that they find. And usually you also have amateur naturalists and scientists from some research institutes, and everybody gets together and they count many species. So the argument that I'm making is that when we think about citizen science, we have to think of an ecosystem of different approaches. That is also, you can find participatory research approaches across a variety of scientific disciplines. This graphic is from a study by Kallenberg and Kasparowski. They have analyzed publication patterns in scientific journals from articles based on citizen science or using somehow citizen science. And they identified 3 big clusters. And I think those approaches that we have here, they can somehow be grouped there. One being volunteer geographical information, another big on citizen science, environmental science, and another one leaning more towards public engagement. But obviously we will also find examples that do not fit in there because they are not published in scientific journals or because the praxis has other traditions. Another point to make is that I believe that citizen science is an ecosystem not only of scientific disciplines, but also we find a variety of approaches of how to work together between scientists and people, members of the public. And here there are many typologies. One is developed by Mookie Heckley, and you will usually find some sort of classification between a level of crowdsourcing, where it's mainly about sending some pictures or sending some data, so citizens act as sensors or are really understood as sensors in these approaches. And then what Mookie calls extreme citizen science, where you can really speak about collaborative science and the whole research project is developed together with communities. And you will find citizen science along this spectrum. And lastly, I think it can also be understood as an ecosystem of institutions that are developing around this research practice now. The Bürgerschaften Wissen platform is one example. There is a similar institution in Austria, and we also have citizen science associations in the US or Australia, China, and then this cost action network. So there are many networks that develop around these communities of practice. And with that, I put the references here so you can find them later. We want to approach this topic from a much more practical perspective and hear from 2 researchers that have done citizen science or are doing citizen science. And with that, I would like to hand over to Mirela to see how does she do research with public or with people from outside academia. Mirela?
Yes, I'm here. Hello everyone, I'm very happy to meet you all and talk a little bit about me. So I am a researcher and I am following a pure academic career. Currently I'm applying for faculty positions. However, apart from my academic job, I do a lot of outreach or public engagement in my research. And today I'm going to talk about 3 forms that I practice to engage the public and their challenges and their impact. So the first thing that I do is speak. I talk at seminars, I give public panels. You can see here some examples. They are all over the world with the following challenge. The biggest challenge when doing that is that the audience is diverse. That means that I cannot use the same slides that I currently use or commonly use in conference presentation. I have to rephrase a lot of the words that I use in my research, in my publications. I have to present them in a way that people understand. And I have to assume a very diverse public, a very diverse audience. Then the second challenge is the fact that the expectations are not always known. Once you start going into a conference, for example, an academic conference, you know what it is expected from you. You know how the room is going to look like, who is going to be there, and what they want from you. When you accept to speak at public talks or seminars, you have no clue what is going to be asked from you. For example, what you see here in these images is the talk that I gave for Singularity Salon in Copenhagen. I did not expect it to be a very fancy event, similar to TEDx event. I had to be dressed up, there was broadcasting, I had to have a very TED-like speech. So that was something that I learned to deal with. Just be prepared for anything and see what they ask for it on the site. The second form that I use when I engage the public is teaching through workshops. The biggest challenge again is a diverse audience. I was just giving such a workshop yesterday evening, and in my audience there were musicians, there were painters, there were programmers, there were art curators, very, very diverse. So I need to know how to explain, how to explain the things that I'm doing, which are very technical. In my case is biotechnology. We were dealing with bacteria, so I had to explain a lot of technical terms in very simple words, and I want people to be able to understand. I want people to be able to do the workshop, finalize it, and learn something from it. Sometimes we deal with children. What you see here is a workshop on extracting DNA. It's called Wear Your DNA. So everybody would extract their DNA, put it in those tubes, and have it around their necks. Another workshop on plants. All of those are at an art festival, and there are a lot of parents with children there. So we had to adapt our vocabulary, our tools, our workshop materials to also be able to address children. The second challenge when giving workshops, and the biggest one, is the unusual setting. So what you see here in the image is a workshop that I give. It's a laboratory workshop, so I'm teaching people how to culture glowing bacteria and how to use it at home and include it in different projects. And this is given in a station in Berlin. This is a post package station, so it's a big hall that has an empty place pretty much to package post packages. Not a common laboratory setting. No, I had no kitchen there, I had no sink, I have no water source, so I had to come prepared with everything in a backpack, and also make sure that minimum contamination sites are kept and sterile conditions are kept. It's quite interesting and fascinating when it works, but it takes a while to make it work. So the first 2-3 workshops that I did in such conditions, it was very difficult for me to manage to finalize them and bring them in to a nice final output. This is another setting in a very black, dark hole, part of a techno music festival. We ran about 4 or 5 biohacking workshops there. And what you see in these images is actually me running a microfluidic workshop. So I'm teaching random people that come to a techno music festival about microfluidics. That is part of the nanotechnology domain, quite advanced. And another workshop that I gave is, you can see here, in Akud Machnoi. That's an art place, so it's a very dark room. Again, audience unknown, very unusual setup. Now the third form of engagement that I practice, and this is the most demanding one, is building a community of people that try to learn more about the things that I am doing. And I do that by opening community wet labs, places where people can just come in and learn about biology, but not only learn about biology, develop their own ideas and put in practice the things that they want to. So community wet labs are places where people with very diverse backgrounds, from scientists, artists, engineers, designers, come together, they try out ideas, and they learn from each other. And these are places where really great projects happen. These are a couple of projects that I'm very proud of that were all developed in such places. They're all on my webpage, and I can talk to you later if you're interested. I'm also part of a big network. It's very important to support each other when we do such community places, and this is called Bacteria Network. We meet 2-3 times a year. We have a common webpage where we post all the knowledge that we gather from all these events that we run in biohacking spaces. And currently, I just founded in Berlin a new laboratory, such laboratory called Top Lab. Now, the biggest challenges that I encounter when I fund such places or I lead such community wet labs is the infrastructure. We need equipment, and that's very expensive and inaccessible because we don't have the funds that usually academia has. For example, an incubator that's very commonly used in any procedure that you do with bacteria costs about 200 euro. So the solution is usually to build such devices, which means that we welcome all the time engineers that have such skills. An example of a full laboratory set was built by one of my friends called Urs Gaudens in Switzerland, for example, and all the resources are put on bacteria, so everyone that wants to have a laboratory at home or open such an do-it-yourself biospace can replicate this laboratory equipment. Now, another challenge that I have is what I call the lab code challenge. In academia, we consider that people need to be qualified to wear a lab coat. They need to have a special training, a special preparation, education. So the biggest question that I have when I come from academia and trying to bring academic procedures outside of the lab is who is allowed or who deserves to wear the lab coat. Is a random artist that jumps in my open community lab deserving to wear a lab coat? Does he have the knowledge? Do you need any knowledge to start doing such procedures? Should they be reserved only for people in academia? For me, these are very interesting questions. I don't know the answers to all of them. I'm trying to figure them out while I'm doing this. Now, the impact of engaging the public is quite a rewarding one. First of all, we open the knowledge. I believe that the way everybody has now a computer and knows how to operate a computer, in the future almost everyone will also know how to do these biological procedures. A biologist will not be only a person working in the lab with this preparation, but anyone could do biology to a certain degree. For example, in this project that you see in the image here, we did a 7 days course in Aalto University with artists where we told them how to modify genetically bacteria. So artists that have never touched a pipette in their lives or ever been in a biolab, they learn how to deal with life at a very core level by modifying genetically bacteria. This is a project that I've done in Berlin where I was also teaching artists how to culture bacteria. This is another project where I was teaching people about spirulina and how to engage with spirulina and with cyanobacteria. Opening the knowledge is very important. The second impact that in public engagement brings to my research is a critical analysis of the technology that I built. Remember that first of all, I am a researcher and I build technology. So I'm interested to see how the people react to that. One of the most controversial, for example, projects that I've done was building this yogurt. This is part of what I call Sustainable Cannibalism project, where we're trying to use our microbiome to see if we could build food out of it. So this yogurt is built using my vagina samples, for example. And I was talking to people and learning about how they view the use of technology, how invasive the technology should be. Is it invasive in any way? Is it just a tool? Should we just take it on just because it exists, or should we be critical about it? Another project that you see is about, DNA. I told you a little bit earlier about that. From here, we had a lot of discussions about the gene technology, how much should it be allowed to tamper with our DNA. This is another project that works with cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria are these microalgae that we use in the laboratory to modify genetically to produce medication for us. So a lot of the drugs that we use are actually produced by algae, by microalgae, and we had a lot of questions of whether we are allowed to exploit the organisms to such an extent, because we are starving them, we're modifying them, we are doing a lot of things to them. And the third biggest impact that public engagement brings to my research is that it gives not only me a perspective shift, but also to the participants. One of the greatest workshops that I've ever had was on bacteriophages last year, part of Transmediale. Bacteriophages are these small viruses that attack bacteria, so they are potentially a good therapy against bacteria infections. They could be an alternative for antibiotics. They're very, very important for research. So I brought a mouth spray that contains such bacteriophages in public, and we started culturing our mouth bacteria and see how the phages fight against the bacteria. After 2 hours of a mix of performance and workshop, I had a lot of people coming back to me, and again with different backgrounds. One of them was a curator for documentaries, part of Berlinale, told me how much the workshop meant to him. The fact that now when he steps out of the room, he can see the world as a different field. He can see this micro world that we usually ignore, a fight between microbiome, a fight and corresponding bacteriophages, things that we usually don't think of. We can understand ourselves at a different level. So that's a really good and key impact that bringing your research to the public can have. Yep, I guess that's it, and I'm very curious to see if you have any questions. I'm passing it on to Alex right now.
Hi, sorry. Hi. So yeah, thanks for that, Mirela. That was great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of more practical ethics for working with people outside of academia, based on my experiences from my PhD. So I'm currently finishing up a PhD at Manchester and Lancaster University on citizen social science. But yeah, to give some context, I've noticed that in kind of citizen science, there's a tendency to kind of focus on the kind of enthusiasm of participants, of citizen scientists, to get involved. But a frequent question that springs to my mind is who are the citizens in citizen science, and kind of what are their motivations for taking part? A lot of the focus and excitement in citizen science appears to be around the science, and in STS around kind of the devices and the technology that allows us to collect data. And I feel that sometimes less attention is given to the actual individuals or the people who are participating. So my research focuses on the practices and kind of processes of citizen social science and citizen science. So Claudia just mentioned this typology, but I think that it's quite useful for thinking about different levels of participation in citizen science. It's from Muki Hackley, yeah, so there are different levels, from kind of crowdsourcing with citizens kind of participating more as kind of censors, all the way through to level 4, which is called extreme citizen science, which is more kind of collaborative science, where citizens are involved in kind of every aspect of the research process, from problem definition to data collection and analysis. So I just wanted to focus on some of the ethical challenges that I experienced from the work that I've been doing. So yeah, I mean, the main ones I've listed here, but I'll go through them now in more detail. But around kind of partnership, collaboration, and power, blurring the boundaries between the researcher and research, between kind of academic and activist, this idea of community rights and kind of representation, ownership and dissemination of data, findings and publications, and also anonymity, privacy and confidentiality, and also interestingly around the institutional ethical review process. So I think one of the important points for me is to consider first and foremost why you want to work with people outside of academia. This needs to be thought about kind of from both sides in terms of what are the benefits for participants and also what are the benefits for academia. So on the right-hand side here, you can see a place called the Alistar, which is like the city station, which is a site that I've just been working at in Barcelona as part of the Cross Action Citizen Science training school. And so one of the things that we were doing during the week was to work together with different practitioners to develop citizen science activities to include local residents. But before kind of designing those activities or before thinking about what we were going to do, we needed to think about who are the residents and how could we best kind of work with it. So another issue with, or another consideration in citizen science is also around the blurring of boundaries between researcher and researched. So in my PhD, one of the projects that I was looking at is the Mass Observation Project, which was a project set up in the 1930s in Britain as a way of recording everyday life in kind of wartime Britain. And so people were asked to send in their observations of big public events and also other things that they were tasked with observing. And in the 1950s, this became a market research organization briefly. And then the project started again in 1980. And the participants, so they recruited a panel of volunteer participants to send in their thoughts and reflections on different subjects. But one of the things that I've kind of noticed from the work that I've done with this project is around the way in which this relationship between who is the researcher and who's being researched becomes very blurred and unclear. So another consideration is also around the kind of blurring of boundaries between the academic and the activist. This shows photos of a project that I was working on called the Empty Houses Project, where participants were asked to send in observations of empty houses in their local area as a way to collect data, to crowdsource data, to try and bring such houses back into use. And I found it an interesting project because I worked with a lot of different groups, different activist groups, housing activist groups, all with different concerns and different interests. And it also became problematic because it also became difficult because I became a bit of a voice for some aspects of housing in Greater Manchester, and this was it's an incredibly complex issue. And anyway, so it became confusing, or the boundaries were blurred between my role as a kind of academic researcher and also my role as an activist trying to affect change. Then I had another project. This was focused more on kind of community rights and community representation. This was in a particular area of Manchester called Moss Side, and I worked with a community development worker from the Moss Side and Hume Community Partnership on a citizen-led participatory project to gather accounts of the local area from the 1950s to the present, to try and document the impacts of migration on those notions of community and place. So the project aimed to capture everyday life in Moss Side as an alternative to the kind of better established narratives perpetuated in the media and held in state archives. For me, it raised kind of many questions about the democratic nature of citizen science and also the fact that there's kind of much talk around the transformational potential of citizen science, but I was interested in how this actually plays out in practice, in participating. So another consideration is around the kind of ownership and dissemination of data and findings and publications in citizen science. Some of the projects that I worked on raised interesting questions around kind of surveillance and this idea of the monitorial citizen, especially kind of the empty houses project that I mentioned. So you actively kind of mobilizing people to spy on each other, or what's going on here. Also with the empty houses project, there was a lot of, I interviewed some of the participants to find out their kind of experiences of taking part and how they saw the project. And one of the interesting things that they were talking about was being very concerned about how their data would be used, and they were very reluctant about reporting observations of empty houses when they thought that homeless people might be sheltering there and that they might be moved on from places where they were taking shelter. But yeah, in terms of our Manchester project in Moss Side, it was I had to be very clear that the data wasn't mine as a researcher, but was very much the communities and the residents to do with as they wanted. And then I'm also left with an important question with my own research about how do I make the data that, or the kind of the write-up of the project useful for the community so that they can do something with it rather than just focusing on kind of publications which are for my benefit. And I think in citizen science there's an interesting developments around lots of multi-authored papers that are trying to kind of challenge this idea of publication and trying to kind of open that up a bit more. But another area, a kind of practical challenge was around kind of anonymity, privacy and confidentiality. This, in the case of our Manchester project, this was kind of, I guess anonymity wasn't possible because a lot of people were submitting photos and kind of personal memories, and there was also videos that were undertaken of people's memories of the area. And so the kind of anonymity was compromised in some ways, but it was also, the project had multiple different aims, and it wasn't necessarily about kind of large-scale data collection in that sense. It was very personal, and it was about generating interest in a newly developed community centre. So it was a lot more focused on kind of sharing stories and shared memories, collective memory. So yeah, these are some of the principles that I think are interesting to embed in kind of research processes. So the kind of ethos and ways of working around mutual respect, equality and inclusion, active learning, making a difference, collective action and personal integrity. I also wanted to just share really quickly, if there's still time, just 2 things that I learnt about at the Cost Action Citizen Science Training School that I was on last week. So in Barcelona, where the school was taking place, we had presentations from different people who were doing really interesting work. And one of them that I wanted, or one of the kind of big topics, was around ethics and around kind of data ownership and ethics in citizen science. This website, decode.eu, is a kind of experimental website that's being developed that's based on kind of notions of blockchain, and it's a European Commission funded project exploring and piloting new technologies to give people more control over their data and how they store and manage personal data generated online. So I thought that was an interesting project to have a look at. And This was another one called Decidim.Barcelona, which is Barcelona's participatory democracy platform, and it attempts to generate transversal participatory processes, both with and beyond the platform, to make democratic policy. Anyway, they were just two more that I put in there. But yeah, thanks. I'm looking forward to discussing some questions with you after this.
Yeah, thanks, Alex, and thank you all for your presentations so far. I think we should put in a question from Julia from the audience, which is addressing Mirela. I'm going to read it out loud. It's how can we as researchers make sure that the language we use is not too easy, different background of audience, and the audience shouldn't have the impression to be considered as dumb. Personally, I think it is a very thin line between easing scientific knowledge and slightly affronting the citizen. Do you have any practical hints how to avoid this, or if already happened, how to deal with this? Yeah.
So I would start by distinguishing between language and attitude. Language is a tool. In itself, it cannot offend. However, attitude can offend. So when you mix the two of them, it has to be the right mix. If your attitude, and that's in general mine, is of a researcher, which means, or of a scientist, which means that you are humbled by the things that you do because the world is so amazing and you're continuously discovering it, instead of being extremely proud and consider yourself superior to your audience, then of course the language is going to follow the attitude. So in my case, I do what I enjoy, and I feel that I'm just not doing enough all the time. So with that attitude, it's very hard to offend anyone. Language can never be too easy. Scientific content can be in itself so complicated that even between scientists we cannot understand each other. So even in my own field, if I have to review a paper in a subfield, it could be that I don't understand the details of that paper. So being able to express even that very low level knowledge in a very easy to understand way is a skill. Some people have it naturally, some people need years of education to get that, and some people would never get it just because simply they can't or they would not want to. So to kind of wrap up, there is no way you can explain it to be too easy, and it's wonderful when you use such an easy language that people say, oh wow, I got it, I understood it. However, you can offend, but not because of the language you use, not because it's too simple terms, but because of this attitude, superior attitude, and those are two different things.
Okay. Yeah, are there any more questions so far? So maybe we can then continue with David. David?
Yeah, hello together. Thanks a lot for the interesting presentations. So, I'm going to start with my presentation now. So my name is David Ziegler, and I'm a researcher and editor for Bürgerschaft und Wissen, which is the online platform for citizen science in Germany. And I'm just quickly going to talk about my work and what we do. So a short overview on the situation of citizen science in Germany, then what we do at Bürgerschaft und Wissen, and with a special focus of how we try to support the citizen science community and especially citizen science practitioners in Germany, and then some reflections on our work. So just really short, we all have heard that there's a long history of citizen science, and the term is around since 1995, and we do, however, see a recent boom, and the reasons we think that this boom is happening are the digital revolution, because it's so easy now to share data and also to communicate between different people. Also synergies with processes of political participation, and also that citizen science as a voluntary scientific activity is recognized as a concept across disciplines, which was not, at least in Germany, the case 10 years ago. There were activities in different fields, but they didn't really interchange or communicate with another. We do have a long tradition of citizen science-like activities in Germany, for example, in the form of voluntary research association. Claudia has talked about the entomologists at the museum who are 125 years old now. So they've been doing this kind of things for a long time, but they haven't called themselves citizen science, of course. We have a heterogeneous community with different interests and goals and different modes of participation. We have talked about that before in the other presentations. So what are we doing at Bürgerschaftenwissen.de? Since 2014, we're an online platform for citizen science with the focus of showcasing, networking, and doing social media for citizen science. And we also offer support and resources. And we have about 95 projects on Bürgerschaftenwissen in the moment, which we have to keep in mind is not the complete scene in Germany. There's much more out there. So what fields do these projects belong? I've put a small graph here. So biodiversity, environmental monitoring are the biggest parts, and that's what's often considered as a kind of classic citizen science approach. That's 2/3 of what we know of in Germany, but there are also different projects in the fields of history, arts and culture, and health research. We've heard about that too. Who is behind these projects? We did a survey, what kind of institutions are behind, and without going into the details for the project at Bürgerschaftenwissen, we see that scientific institutions like universities and research institutes are the leading actors in 60% of the project, but 40% it's NGOs, government agencies, media, and so on. So what we would consider non-classic leading actors. And that is quite interesting, because these 40% are often not really looked at when we look at the scientific discussion about citizen science. And just to talk quickly about the goals of these projects, we also did a survey on that, and we see that data is the most important goal for a lot of projects, but we also have science, society, interaction, nature conservation, and learning new things, which are communication goals or political goals or educational goals. So we see that that is prominent in a lot of citizen science projects too. So we have heterogeneous goals in the scene, which is beneficial in some ways, but also causes some challenges on the other hand. So what do we do to support citizen science practitioners in Germany? First, we have a guide, Citizen Science for All, which explains how to start a project and what steps you need to undertake. We were also involved in publishing the green paper on Citizen Science Strategy 2020 for Germany, which are policy recommendations for citizen science, which we then gave to the Federal Ministry of Education and Research. Also, we do a lot of workshops, kind of training workshops or stakeholder workshops. In the last years, we did them on storytelling, wiki systems, videos, nature conservation areas, and social media, all for citizen science practitioners in order to incorporate these topics into their projects or to make a better social media strategy for citizen science. And these workshops are running really well, we think, because we get 20 or 30 people who are directly involved in citizen science and bring them together with experts in the respective fields, and then give them an input in the field, but also a chance to network and exchange knowledge and best practice. So we are continuing this kind of activities, and planning to do the workshops on evaluation or open science in the next years, for example. And then we also organize a big conference once a year, do personal consultation. And our new thing is we've got a blog on our new website, and we're looking for guest authors. So if anyone is interested in writing on their views or ideas about citizen science, please feel free to contact me. That's so far. I want to reflect on our work and what we did for the last years. So I think what we could achieve is that we have a growing network of stakeholders in Germany that are interested in citizen science, and especially also stakeholders outside the classic academic world, which is, I think, very beneficial to the field. These stakeholders are starting to form a community that goes beyond scientific disciplines. So the history people start talking with the biodiversity people, which are starting talking with the health people, and they all agree that the common thing they're doing is this voluntary research thing, which I think is very interesting. We have a high request of projects presenting themselves on the platform. It's like 2 projects per month are coming onto the platform, which is much more than we first expected. And we get in the main a positive media coverage. Of course, there's also critique, but most of what we read in the media is positive and enthusiastic for citizen science. If that's justified, we can of course discuss. However, we also face some challenges. The term citizen science is controversial in Germany for various reasons. Just to list one, that a lot of older people in Germany have no English knowledge. So we really have to think about if the English term citizen science is a good thing for the German citizen science community, or if we should rather use a German word for that. But there are also other aspects of the definition. So, but just to say, this term citizen science is controversial and not totally fixed. Claudia told this very broad definition, but there are a lot of definitions out there, and there's no common ground where there's not one accepted definition. So we have to keep that in mind. Also, the long-term perspective is not clear. Our project 2 is funded until 2019. After that, we don't know yet what's going on, so we have to see that we get these activities into a long-term perspective. I talked about the different goals and also definitions of success of different stakeholders. That's of course a challenge if you have different people who have different goals with citizen science. It can cause friction, of course. And also, with Bürgerschaft und Wissen, we are de facto a kind of gatekeeper for citizen science, because each project which is on Bürgerschaft und Wissen is considered citizen science. If others see that or not, especially in the light of this controversial term citizen science, it's sometimes difficult for us to find out if a new kind of approach to citizen science really fits the term citizen science. So that is we have to spend a lot of time sometimes when new projects, new kind of approaches come to us, if it's an innovative, interesting thing, or if it just doesn't fit the idea and the sense of citizen science. This reflected so far. I want to just talk about some quick lessons learned. So we can say citizen science works, multiple goals can be achieved. However, it is not for free. What's sometimes discussed in the media, that it's a cheap method of data collection. We don't see that. We think that if you want to make a successful citizen science project, you have to invest, especially in the field of communication, because that's the key factor. And communication, as Mirela said, some people never learn it, and others have to be trained. And it takes time and effort. That should be kept in mind when setting up a citizen science project. Success factors for the long-term motivation of citizens and citizen science projects are direct contact to scientists, a regular feedback, and being part of a bigger thing. So that's what I'm talking about. That's not things that happen like this, but there's people that have to invest time and money to achieve a good feedback culture and to get in touch with the citizens and to also be honest and transparent about what you do. Yeah, but that we could see are key success factors for the motivation of citizens. And yeah, what you should not do is just actually the opposite thing, being intransparent about project goals and the citizens' role in the project. That's is like Alex said, in some cases it's not, you have to be very clear and you have to think about who has which role in a project in order to be transparent and fair with all the participants. You shouldn't promise things you cannot hold. And you should also see that the data that is produced is really interesting for research and that it's not just kind of a playground for citizens in order to get them to do something with science. If people recognize that the data they produce is not interesting for real research, that will be very frustrating and will not be good for the citizen science project. Okay, that's so far perspectives. Maybe we discussed that. I think I'm at the end of my time and I say thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, David, for your presentation. And we have another question from Kerstin. Maybe, David, you can give your opinion on that one, which is, how do you deal with data that comes from citizens under the age of 18?
Yeah, so I think maybe what's behind that, I'm not sure if I get what's behind it, if it's just a legal question or if it's a question about data quality. I think you have to take measures in any citizen science project and with any participants, no matter what age they are, to ensure that the data is within the quality lines you need to answer your research question. And there are a lot of methods you can use. For example, you can run the data through automatic plausibility algorithms that check if it's out of the way or if it's within the limits you are expecting. You can use peer-to-peer review. You can have a trained person look at it in the end. So like in any research, it's a question of devising methods to ensure that your data is good. And I think that's, yeah, fits to normal science as well as to citizen science. And yes, the legal question, I'm not sure what you, I mean, I think the legal questions are rather in the area if there's an insurance maybe for an activity or if they're allowed to do it by their parents. I mean, we see citizen science sometimes used in schools, and I don't think that that you're forbidden to give a data point because you're not like 18 years old. I don't know of any legislation that forbids that in Germany at least. So I think it's really a question of quality assurance methods.
And if I can just add on that, I think then also working out these questions, that is the big topic now, and people who are in the citizen science community. So this is one reason why we have these practitioner organizations, or we think that they can be useful, because for example in ECSA we have now a working group on open science and also one on data issues that can pick up these questions and then figure that out, and also how that varies for the different countries or different project approaches.
Okay, I guess there are more questions coming from the audience. Multiple attendees are typing. So, okay, here's the next one. Are there examples for citizen science in other disciplines than biology, I guess, health, etc.? Do you know something in political science? Who wants to answer that one?
Yeah. So I can answer that a little bit. in terms of the Dissidem platform that I mentioned in Barcelona, is a really interesting example of where they're trying to do deliberative democracy and to raise, so the residents in Barcelona can raise issues on the platform that they want to be taken to the municipality, and through a process of kind of voting on the importance of those issues, then they decide which ones are taken forward to the municipality to ask them to do something about. But yeah, I also know that, like, for example, in humanities, there are other projects around. There's one called Transcribe Bentham that's run out of UCL. That's a big kind of online crowdsourcing transcription, so getting people to transcribe Bentham's work. But yeah, there are other projects in other disciplines.
Yeah, I just posted a link there from it's a guy from Austria, and he works at university, and they do a quantitative research in political science, working with school classes, students, and I think they completed one project. It was asking them of taking photos, I think, of how they get involved with political thinking or advertising, yeah. And then now they have another one that is also with school classes. So if you look at this paper and one the first author, then I think you should find it. Plus, in the Gewiss project, we did another webinar on citizen science beyond the natural sciences, in social science, humanities, and so on. So maybe you can also find some more hints there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, you're welcome. And there are more questions coming. So the next one is from Vanessa. What is your experience regarding the diversity of the citizens taking part in citizen science? Do you mostly work with people already very interested in academic scientific work? Are you able to work with people from all over the age range? And what is your advice when you want to reach a crowd that is as diverse as possible? So 3 questions in a row. Who wants to start?
I would take the first answer. So I think, yes, you can say, when you look at the classic examples of citizen science, you have people who are interested in citizen science, people who are rather well off. You have also a lot of people who are older and are not, like, how do you say, who are retired, because there's just more time for these people. And I think, yes, that is definitely the case as far as we can see from the projects we're in. According to your questions, I think then you should be more precise of what is actually the goal of your citizen science project, because I think you should be clear about what you want. And if you say, for my research question, I need a certain crowd to work with that, it's legitimate to also look for a certain crowd, as long as you're transparent about that. If you, of course, say, I have a research question, but I also have the goal of involving a lot of people into science, then you have to maybe make a different project which also has mechanisms to get people who are not close to the scientific world to get into science. But as I said, I think that depends on what kind of citizen science project you are designing. If you have a pure research project, or if you have a strong communication or education aspect in your project too. And then you should, then you need to think of methods how you can get people to participate. But that should be the first questions where you want to focus.
Okay, anyone wants to add something to that? Okay, are there more questions from the audience. So if not, you have still time to think about your questions and write them down. Maybe we can continue with some other questions that can maybe point out another perspectives. Which is, do you relate citizen science to other aspects of open science in your work? And if so, how do you see they are related?
If I can specialize this, I was thinking about Mirela, for example, because I know that you also help. Now you work on the open job, so you're one of the developers of this open personal lab. And then you talk about the outreach activities and about this way of open hardware, how important it is for the community wet lab that you are building. But how does that make sense in your work, and how do you link the two? And then also, Alex, I don't know if you also have.
So I guess from your perspective, I'm a practitioner, which means that most of the times I do things without having the theory of what I do, so I don't analyze so much myself. From my perspective, there is almost no difference in what on my side. There's almost no difference between engaging the public and open knowledge. They somehow come together. My research is supposed to come back to the public and go back in one shape or another. One of the shapes is through academic research papers. Some of them are open source, some of them are not. Some of them are open access, some of them are not. And another part of it is through workshops or through art performances. So it's part of not only my job as a researcher, but it's something that I want to express what I do in a certain way, and I express it in academic format or in knowledge format as open as possible. So somehow they come together. The way I see it is that I produce knowledge, I want it to be open, so I go and take the knowledge that I produce and share it with the people. And then people give me feedback on that, or they even contribute to the knowledge that I further produce. So it's a cycle where I cannot see the public, I cannot see the citizens, and the knowledge that I produce apart from each other. They're part of what I do, they come as a package.
I was just going to jump in and say that I see that my work is really related to the ideas of open science. I think it's important to ask questions around who can collect data, who can do something with the data, who can analyze it, and how it can be used. And so I see my work as very much asking all those kinds of questions and kind of really throwing it open. And I think that citizen science in particular raises a lot of those issues.
Okay, thanks. There are more questions coming, I think. No, not yet. So, yeah, maybe I have a tiny specific question to Alex and Claudia. Maybe you both talked about the extreme citizen science, the level construction by Hartley. Maybe you can give an example of those kind of activities that are concerned with this extreme perspective.
Yeah, so I know that at the Extreme Citizen Science Lab at UCL, where Muki works, there are a lot of specific projects. But I guess the extreme level was about involving citizens in kind of every step of the way. So in kind of designing a kind of a question, discussing methods for how to go about answering the research question, and then also being involved in the data collection and the analysis. So in the projects that I was talking about in my PhD, I guess one of them was kind of the one called R Manchester, that was working with residents in the area of Moss Side in Greater Manchester. And in many ways, the project was very much led by the citizens. They determined what the issue was that they wanted to look at. I worked with them to develop appropriate methods and to kind of discuss how we'd go about collecting the data. But I mean, they basically went and interviewed other residents in the area about how it had changed and what their experiences were of living in a particular area. And then we are still kind of working to analyze, I guess, or to work with that data and to see how we can use it and how we can, take it forward. So that would be one example from my PhD, but the ECL Extreme Citizen Science Lab has a lot of projects as well.
Can I add something? I actually think, so for me, I don't know so many projects in Germany that fit this kind of description like Muki Hegley puts it. Because I think the biggest problem with that is not that scientists are not willing or not able, but to find people, citizens, who can take up this big time and energy consuming responsibility of being a real, on one level with the scientists. That is not so easy, I think, because I mean there's not like hundreds of people out there saying, hey, yeah, I'm going to invest a big amount of my time into the project that scientists are like thinking of and putting out there. What we do see, however, and that's in my opinion not so much talked about, is that you have NGOs and small groups who are doing their independent research of things that they are really strongly interested in, but sometimes they're not even cooperating or communicating with the established science sector. But they're just saying, we have our stuff, what's interesting for us, and we're just going to do it. And I would rather see that's kind of an autonomous research that is sometimes not even connected, or maybe only in a second or third step connected to the established science area. And but that, in my opinion, doesn't really fit this definition of extreme citizen science, because for me it's more like an autonomous citizen science, because there's sometimes no cooperation with established academia.
Can I just jump in and say, in response to that, I think there are other projects. I guess the question is around the science, maybe, which also links to Caroline's question, or around research. But there's other projects like Slum Dwellers International, which is an organization, an NGO, where they're encouraging people to collect data about their access to water, to toilets, to different facilities in a lot of different places around the world, and then kind of working with them to use the data to affect change. So it's maybe, I don't know, different forms of projects. Maybe it's not exactly extreme citizen science in the same way, but it's the principles of kind of involvement at each step of, or involving the participant, the citizen at each step of the way, are still there.
Okay, thank you both. Another question addressing Mirela. You presented your workshops done with an artistic framework. Would you just say something about working and researching at this intersection between arts and science, and how you manage to open up that space and get into contact?
First of all, I'm a scientist and not an engineer, and I'm going to use half a minute to explain the difference. scientists and engineers, they're pretty much to the same thing. It's just the mindset is very different. When you are an engineer, you usually look for progress. The current state is wrong, and you look on how to improve it. As a scientist, the mindset is more of discovering what's around and being surprised by what you see. Again, the work doesn't differentiate. In Germany, there is this diploma that you get when you finish your PhD, whether you want to be an engineer or a scientist, but that's very specific to Germany. In general, the work is the same. The mindset is different. So, as a scientist, I'm more inclined to see my work as an art performance in itself. So it connects very, very well with the artistic environment. It's just my own take on it. It's very specific. I see art as a way of expressing my research in a very free way, not in a such strict format as an academic publication, for example. But in terms of, so I'm not researching at the intersection between art and science. My research is at the intersection between computer engineering and biology. I'm building biomedical devices. I express this research through scientific output and artistic output. So I don't know if that is clear. And in the way I express it, in my expressing, I also engage public as well. And a little bit looping back to the previous discussion, it's all about what do people get when they get involved. Of course, if I tell to a bunch of 100 people, bring me your data, and they don't feel like they get anything out of that, they are going to be very specific people that would be able to do that. If the exchange seems fair, if they get their curiosity satisfied, if they have projects that they want to develop together with me, or if they get something more than that, maybe idea of contributing or something like that, then the exchange is fair. So then you get to a more diverse audience. How did I manage to open up the space in Berlin? This is something that has to do also with attitude. So this is not something that is an established practice. I've lived in many places. Because of my academic career, I have to move every time I change a position. And every time I move to a place, I try to change the place, not only by sitting inside of an office in a university, but also by getting involved in the public life of that specific city. In Berlin, art is primarily dominant, so of course I got involved with art. I got involved with a lot of projects that got public funding. So that's how I got to open that space. It could be that in the next location that I'm going to be next year, I'm going to do something else. But it's a matter of a personal attitude that I take. Whenever I go somewhere, I try to change also the public life of that place. Not only go home, work, and have this kind of cycle.
Okay, thanks. Oh, David has to leave. Hi. So we have like 5 to 6 minutes left, and maybe we can pick up Carolyn's questions, which is referring to the one that I already asked you before. Is citizen science really by definition open? I can engage the public but enclose my data methods. Do you think there's a moral connection of citizen science and open science? Who wants to answer?
If I may, but I cannot give a report from the practice, but I can pull out something of the pocket that I was thinking of, if there is space for it or not. Because what we have, I wanted to show this briefly. In the last webinar, there was the Toni Ross-Hellauer, who mentioned the principles of open scholarship, and I asked him where he did get them from, and he said he made them himself. So I know that there are a lot of principles of open science and what it is around, but these were his principles. And I just wanted to show quickly that there is something like 10 principles of citizen science. and that has been developed by a working group in the ECSA association, where really people who do it came together and say, okay, instead of a definition, can we find what is good practice? And I don't know if you can, so you would, you have there at principle number 7 to make your data open and to publish open access wherever is possible in citizen science projects. So you can see that within at least this community that is coming together in the ECSA organization, that this part of open science is very much valued. What we can say, however, is that also when I said that citizen science appears to me like a newbie to the open science world, I think the vice versa is also true. So I believe that there are two different communities, some that are working on citizen science and some that are working on open science, and there's not too much overlap yet. So this is also one part of the work that we try to do, and that this webinar is part of. For example, at ECSA we have this working group on open science, and we've just got together with people from both spheres and wrote a little paper on okay, how can they link? And we find some examples of projects that do engage the public very much and very deep, but then they stay close to the data, because this is actually a prerequisite of working with some people. But then we have other projects that do both very much, and so you can distinguish different intensities. And I really think that that there is this concept of situated openness. So you really look at in which situation, in which concrete context you are, and how you think about openness or about participation. And I think that it helps also a lot here when we talk about.
I'm going to jump quickly in also this addressing Julia's question, the last two things. She says, how do we overcome the problem that several researchers from different institutes are working on similar research problems, even within the same geographic region? Why it seems to be so difficult to share the knowledge and work together instead of keeping everything secret? So the fact that you don't do open science doesn't mean that you keep everything secret. Open science means an extra effort to actually make the knowledge accessible to people. You need to wrap it, you need to make instructables. It's an extra effort. The fact that you are not willing to put that effort doesn't mean that you keep it secret. It could be that you give it on demand or something like that. You just don't put this extra effort to have it out there, to have it in instructable forms or in workshops. And then I don't think there is a problem. I mean, that several researchers from different institutes are working on the same topic, even within the same geographic region. I think, first of all, knowledge, work on the same type of domain should be as much as possible done by different people. So then you have a really good outcome of the knowledge. We should not all work together. It's not good for the knowledge itself. Then you get a very uniform project, then you get very uniform output. It's very important that you have all this diversity into approaching a topic, to have different perspectives on it, but also to have different learnings from it. So we should not all in the whole world unite and work on the same topic together. It's good that we approach the same topic, and it's very good that they have different perspectives on it. So there is no problem in the fact that there is no collaboration. The problem could, maybe the collaboration could improve it, maybe it could not. But I don't see it at all as a problem, the way you express it, even if it's within the same region.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we can close the Q&A with one last question, which is very important, I guess. Have you any recommendations for the fellows or for everyone who is interested in working together with people from outside academia?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I guess I talked about some of the things that I thought were important to think about. But first and foremost, I think is really giving consideration to who who are these people, and kind of thinking about who you want to work with and why. So thinking about public engagement first before thinking about the kind of citizen science.
Okay, so I think we have to come to an end now. Thank you very much, Claudia, David, Mirela, and Alex for the excellent presentations. And also thanks to all the participants for attending today. We hope you enjoyed the webinar, and you are going to receive a mail with the recording of the webinar and also the presentations, as well as the contacts of the presenters. And also we want to send you a feedback form in the next couple of hours to give us your impressions of the webinar, so we can try to make the program and the webinars even better in the future. So thank you very much, and have a nice day, everybody.
Also, thank you, Wikimedia, for hosting and inviting us. That's really great, and thanks.
I was muted again. Thank you as well.
Oh, and one last thing I already mentioned, the next webinar will be on open access, and it's going to take place at the end of January, I think, January 31st. I don't know the time, but we will send you all the information with the mail. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I guess it's in the afternoon. Okay. Thanks.